Hello, I am Hamida Rebai. I will present today a session about deploying an application for Azure Kubernetes Services. So thank you to all sponsors mentioned here. Who I am and how you can reach me in social media. If you have any questions after these sessions, you can ask me on Twitter, by email or LinkedIn. I am Microsoft MVP in developer technologies. I am also Microsoft certified trainer, Azure certified. I am software architect, .NET Foundation member and the speaker. So today we will start in the beginning by defining Kubernetes, see the difference between it and Docker. We will present Azure Kubernetes Services, and we will follow our demo after. So we will start in our demo by creating a Kubernetes application in Visual Studio 2019. You can use also the new version of Visual Studio to create an application in preview mode. After, we will deploy it on Azure Container Registry. Next, we will create our Azure Kubernetes Services cluster using Azure CLI and Azure Portal. We will see how we can deploy an Azure Kubernetes Services cluster, run our application using Azure CLI. We will use another approach to deploy our cluster using an IRM template or using Azure DevOps Starter, where we will ensure the continuous integration and the delivery integration. We talk here about CI/CD. And we will show you how you can use Bridget to Kubernetes to be able to debug your application. What's Kubernetes? Kubernetes is an open source container orchestration platform that enables the operation of an elastic web server framework for cloud applications. Kubernetes can support data center outsourcing to public cloud service provider or can be used for web hosting at scale. Website and mobile application with complex custom code can deploy using Kubernetes on commodity hardware to lower the costs on web server provisioning with public cloud hosts and to optimize software development processes. So Kubernetes, as we said before, is an open source container orchestration platform, but Docker is the main container virtualization standard used with Kubernetes. Other elastic web server orchestration systems are Docker Swarm, CoreOS, Tectonic, and Mesosphere. Intel also has a competing container standard with Kata, and there are several Linux container versions. So, Docker has the largest share of the container virtualization marketplace for software products. Docker is a software development company that specializes in container virtualization, whereas Kubernetes is an open source project supported by a community of coders that include professional programmers for all of the major IT companies. Azure Kubernetes Services, or AKS, simplifies deploying a managed Kubernetes cluster in Azure by offloading the operational overhead to Azure. As a hosted Kubernetes services, Azure handles critical tasks like health monitoring and maintenance. Since Kubernetes masters are managed by Azure, you only manage and maintain the agent nodes. So AKS is free, you only pay for the agent nodes within your clusters, not for the masters. To be able to test the demo presented today, you need to have Azure account where you should be able to create an Azure Kubernetes cluster, Docker Community Edition is free. You can download it from the portal of Docker. We need to use a bash environment here. We will use Azure Cloud Shell, so we need to add it in Azure. And we will use Visual Studio 2019. You can use also, as I mentioned before, the new version in preview mode, Visual Studio 2022. Now let's start our demo. To be able to try all demos, so I recorded all this demo and we will follow this video today. So the first demo is to be able to create Kubernetes application in Visual Studio 2019. Here we open Visual Studio, we click create a new project. We can search Kubernetes from our templates to be able to get the application, container application for Kubernetes. Here we give a name for our project and we click on create. And we will have after ready application here, we can choose ASP.NET Core. Before we need to select ASP.NET Core 5 or 6 if you have in preview mode. And we select the type of our application, MVC or Web API. We have Angular, we have React.js, so we have many templates here. I will select, in this case, Web API. We can add HTTPS or enable as a runtime compilation. So we have many options to create our application. And here we have the YAML file for Kubernetes, and we have Docker file because we will use Docker for container. As you can see, the structure of our application. Here we have the page. Now we will deploy the application on Azure Container Registry is the first step before using Kubernetes service, Azure Kubernetes Service. So we will use Visual Studio to publish this application. So we click on publish. We select our targets. From the list here, I will choose Azure. We can choose Docker Container Registry directly, and we select Azure Container Registry. We have Docker Hub, as you can see here, that we can use it. So we need to identify to have an account in Azure, as mentioned before, and we will create here our container registry. So we give a DNS prefix. We need to give our subscription name to identify the resource group or create a new one. Select the region. And as you can see here, we click on finish. It takes few seconds to be able to deploy our application on Azure Container Registry. Here we click on published to be sure that all application is published. We will check here in the portal of Azure if our Azure Container Registry is already created or not. We can search using your research group. As you can see here, AKS project container is already created. And we can check our version depot here, AKS project, and the latest version here. We need that after when we want to create our cluster. Now we will create our AKS cluster using Azure CLI. So to do that, we can use AZ AKS create. We need to give a name of the research group here, AKS GR, for example, the name of our cluster, number of nodes, here 1 node, I don't need more, and we will attach our container. So it's the previous container that we already created. And I will just use that to create it. I need to check that all information here. So as you can see, the name of our container. It can take a few seconds to wait the creation, and we get a JSON file. And here I will check my research group here, and we find here my cluster already created. Now we will create our AKS cluster using Azure Portal. So to have an interactive interface. It's really simple. We select create research. We have Kubernetes service. We try to find the research group here, or create a new one if you want. I give a name to my cluster here, select the region. I can just select the Kubernetes version. You can always be able to update your version if you have a new one. So we can select default one. And the number of nodes here, for example, 3. We can select 1, 3. So it depends from your needs and the needs of your application. Here we will select our container in integration tab, container registry, and we click on create, and your cluster will be created like before. So we have two methods to create our cluster, using Azure CLI and using the portal is the simple way. Our deployment is in progress. It can take a few seconds, as I said before, and here we can check our cluster. It's already created here. We can check node pools. We have one node, we can add nodes. We can scale our node, but not here. It's change it to another place. It's scaling. And here in overview, now we will deploy an Azure Kubernetes Service cluster, and we will run our application using the Azure CLI. So we start by deploying our cluster here. The first step is to open Cloud Shell to be able to connect to our dashboard. After, we will use this information as the account set, our subscription. We need to identify that. As AKS get credential, we need to specify the research group, the name of your cluster, so we can find these commands when you open your Azure Portal and your cluster here connects. We will see that after in detail. So we will just explain how we to do that. The second part is to create an empty file called Azure Demo Deployment YAML, where we will define our deployment, and we will copy this content as an example, but it depends from your application. Here, an example of YAML file to be able to deploy my application. It's web API. It's not user interface, not MVC. It's simple. Here we have the pods. We have our container. And after we will run the application and deploy it in the cluster, we will use for that kubectl apply. We will see that after how we can call the name of your YAML manifest in this way. So kubectl apply. Azure demo deployment YAML is the file that we created before, and we will use kubectl get deployment to check if the deployment was created or not. When the application runs, a Kubernetes service exposes your application frontend. In our case, we don't have a frontend application, it's only web service. But if you have many services and web application, this process can take few minutes to complete. And in the end, we will use kubectl get service command line using the watch arguments. If we have a web API, if we have a web application, not with API, not the service. Here we click on connect and we check here is account set, get credential to be able to connect to our cluster. And I will use VI to create our YAML file. I will copy this information here. We have the name of our deployments. We identify the name of your app pod. And here we have the container. My container here, cluster. I will go to research group because I have the container in the same research group as the cluster AKS. And we will check the image that we will use it in a repository. We have AKS project, latest, so I will copy this as image that we will use it before deploying our application in the cluster. So we copy this code here and we'll save this file after. And after we will use kubectl apply and the name of our YAML file. So a few seconds, and here we have the message that the deployment is created. I will check if it's really created or not using this command line kubectl get deployment. And as you can see here, we have two deployments. Now, if you have web application, you can use get service demo Kubernetes deployment using watch arguments. In our case, we don't have. So we deploy an Azure Kubernetes Services cluster using ARM templates. ARM template is a JavaScript object notation. It's a JSON file that defines the infrastructure and the configuration for your projects. The template uses declarative syntax, and in declarative syntax, you can describe your intended deployment. And we will click here on the template. So here we have your template here, and you need to fill all this application to be able to create your AKS service, your cluster service. Here we can find more detail about this template in GitHub, as you can see here. This is an example of Azure deploy JSON file. Use it in our case here. You can add more deployments, specific deployments, if you want to create more than Azure Container Service. So I will check the group, the research group here. I'll create a new one, for example. In this case, we need to check the region location, the cluster name, and here we have the SSH RSA public key. We need to generate it using this command line. So we will check here our shell. We'll use a shell Azure. So we will use Cloud Shell, and we will use this command line to generate our public key. Here I will give a name to the file, RSA file, for example, no passphrase for this example, to be simple, and we will try to get the public key here. So we use get here RSA pip. I will copy these contents generated by the command line. And I will add it here. So as you can see, it's okay. I give a name to admin username. We need to check all, but we can click on verify and create to be able to see if you didn't miss it anything here. We missed it. DNS prefix, I'll give a name. My cluster name, for example, my AKS cluster, and I click on verify and create, and your cluster will be created here. It's another method. So we saw today 3 methods. Here we will deploy an Azure Kubernetes cluster using Azure DevOps Starter. It's another method to be able to deploy our cluster. So we go to Azure, we will type here DevOps Starter. We click on Create. We need to select GitHub or Azure DevOps. I will select Azure DevOps in our case. Click on Done. And as you can see here, we have .NET, we have Node.js, PHP, we have many languages that we can use, and you can bring your own codes if you have your codes. So we will show you how you can start from here, from new code. So we have ASP.NET Core or simple IoT. You can add your database too. And in our case, I will select that. And here we have many Azure services that to deploy the application. We will select, in our case, Kubernetes services. Now we'll debug your application using Bridge to Kubernetes. We'll show you how to do that. To debug here, we need to compile our application and to execute it, to be able to see if it works or not. It's simple, it's empty application. And we will check here, Bridge to Kubernetes. You find it in the menu in Visual Studio. We will check the properties. We select debug. We need to parameter bridge to Kubernetes to our deployed cluster to be able after to debug it. Here we can find the local cluster. We can select your local cluster, for example, or your account if you want to debug it from Azure or from another provider, cloud provider. So we can use anyone. Now we go back, so our demo, we finished already our demo. We go back to our presentation. I will share this here, some reference that you can use it to have more information about Azure Kubernetes services. So we have the first one, the documentation of Azure Kubernetes Service, where you can find many information to be able to secure your cluster, to scale out, scale in, you have many really information here. I recommend to use the documentation to see more information if you need. You can check my Medium blog here. You can find some articles that added and blogs related to deploy an application for AKS or how we can use container. And we have in LinkedIn Learning many information. We have here, it's in French, but it's an overview about Azure Kubernetes Service, If you need to have more information about that, AKS, you can check this link. And here, if you have any questions, you have, I think, 10 minutes for questions. You can join me always on Twitter, by email, or here use on LinkedIn.
Okay, Hamida, I'll post the questions screen.
Yes, please. Okay.
So we can wait a minute or two to see if there are any questions. Allora, se ci sono domande potete pubblicarle nella finestra Q&A di Teams, che vedete deve essere della sua destra. Vi ricordo che l'intera sessione è stata registrata e sarà disponibile sul canale YouTube della .NET Community, quindi potrà essere rivista. I just reminded that the entire session was recorded and it will be available at our .NET Community's YouTube channel. So if anybody wants, can review it later. Okay, let's see if there are any questions. Hamida, you were too clear. Everybody understood everything, so no questions.
Okay. I was faster.
So let's see if anyone got something to say. Okay, I think it's okay. We have no questions at the moment.
Okay.
I want to thank you very much for your time and your session. It was very interesting about all possible solutions for implementing Kubernetes on Azure. Personally, I will review it later on YouTube. I need to watch it again.
Okay.
So I want to thank you and see you next time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Grazie a tutti i partecipanti. Buona serata. Bye bye.
Bye.